Don't forget, on the 18th of June, we'll be marking the 80th birthday of Paul McCartney with a special Word in Your Park in Holland Park. Some guests announced, more being announced all the time. Get your tickets below.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Welcome to another edition of Word in Your Attic, and to somebody that we haven't seen since the early 90s when we were all on music magazines. And how many people, I ask, how many people started out on Kerrang, had finished up sports writer and world cricket authority? The answer, I suspect, is very few. In fact, it may be only one, the great Jon Hotten. Jon, it's lovely to see you.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Yeah, I don't know about world authority, but yes.
That's what we're saying.
Cricket's one of my
Yeah, that's what we're selling you, Jon.
Yeah. And do you remember your days at Kerrang fondly? Because I can remember that most rock journalists complained a bit. They were always saying, "Look, I've got to interview the Corn Dollies, and I really want to. I really want to interview kind of Pulp or whatever it was." But on Kerrang, nobody complained. They were hanging around with Guns N' Roses, getting free records, free drink. They had a wonderful time. Was it a very fond memory for you? Oh,
absolutely. I look back now, and it was by far the greatest job I ever had. I mean, it was in the, everyone thinks their era was the glory era, don't they? They all think the time that they were a music journalist was the time. I did a little event last weekend, actually, a cricket thing with Felix White, who is another musician turned cricket type person. He was the guitarist in the Maccabees. And is now he's written a book about his involvement with cricket. He does a big cricket podcast with Greg James and Jimmy Anderson. And and he was kind of saying, he said to me, "Well, when did you start on Kerrang?" I said, "Oh, in 1987." And it was like someone, me asking someone and them saying I started in 1958, when Chuck Berry was big, when it was like Little Richard. What bands were? Bon Jovi and Europe and Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith. And it was like saying dinosaur names to him.
That's old school.
Yeah, old school. It was like, to me, Guns N' Roses are still quite new. That's sort of one of the newer bands that are on the circuit. Yeah. So everyone thinks that their era was the kind of golden era, but that era of Kerrang, I started in 87, and I've been to London College of Printing, and we had to do work experience. I remember incredibly clearly having a terror of where my work experience might be, because we had to arrange it ourselves. And I had two choices. I had either the Cricketer magazine, which was in Guildford, which I thought would be great and just up the road and cushy, or I could go to Kerrang. I ended up deciding I should go to Kerrang, and always wondered about that fork in the road, whether I should have taken the other fork. But I went to Kerrang, and I never left. I never left after the work experience. I'd done one of the other great projects at the London College of Printing was you had to interview a famous person. That was the assignment. It was as simple as that. And obviously back in the days before there was any kind of social media, how the hell did you get in touch with a famous person? So I wrote a letter to Tommy Vance at the Friday Rock Show, and I was at home one night on a Friday, and he phoned me up. And he said, "Wow!" My sister answered the phone, and she sort of came in. I remember
the voice of Get Him After.
Yeah, exactly. She came in the lounge, and she was like white, and she said, "Tommy Vance is on the phone for you," and he invited me into see the Friday Rock Show so I could interview him. And I'll never forget, it was the night that the Zeebrugge ferry sank. So whenever that was, and in the BBC studios, they had the little television, and this is way before rolling news or anything. And he was actually broadcasting and looking up at the events that were happening, and sort of he would play a record and then tell you what was happening, and then go back and play, here's kind of Magnum, and by the way, 200 people have just. But he did it in such an amazing piece of broadcasting. It was incredible, and so I got to see it firsthand. So I wrote it up and gave it to Geoff Barton, who was the editor of Kerrang at the time, and he kind of took me on from there. So I owe it all to Tommy Vance, really.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was
so who else was
the person you interviewed at Kerrang?
The first they were a Welsh glam rock band called Monroe.
Oh, right.
Who were their PR was a guy called Simon Porter. I don't know if you remember Simon Porter, who ended up being he's now I believe he's now the manager of Status Quo.
Oh, right.
Oh, right.
So his career obviously shot upwards from managing or looking after the PR for Monroe. So interviewed Monroe, and then I can't remember now. I mean, it went from there. I mean, the thing was, it was because, as you'll know, in the music market, there wasn't a huge amount of titles, and there was certainly only one that covered heavy metal in any sort of detail. So we would just clean up all of the trips and the every heavy metal band there was.
So where did you go? Where were your exotic trips?
Probably.
Mark Ellen often talks about going to the Isle of Man with Nazareth.
Yeah, beat that if you can.
Yeah, well, I
city boy to Jersey in a private aircraft. Come on.
It's weird. I went to places as mundane. I went to Morecambe. I went to play Edinburgh and so on. But then you next day you'd be in LA. The first time I went to New York, which was the first trip I had before I even went anywhere in England, just go to New York. I went to interview King Diamond. I don't know if you remember him.
It's always bands that nobody ever heard of.
How they got you to talk to the group.
Exactly, this was how you got to, because none of the other bigger writers wanted to talk to King Diamond because his shtick was he was a Danish guy. He'd been a goalie, a football goalie, and it had all kind of gone wrong. So he became a black metaler, and he used to paint his face with a cross. And he was exposed by, we had a writer called Dave Dixon who was very, very interested in the occult and knew all about the occult. And he did this interview with King Diamond where he exposed King Diamond's lack of knowledge. So the King was very much on the downturn.
His career.
He wasn't sufficient. He wasn't sufficiently occult. The idea we have an occult editor.
Well, Dave was amazing. I mean, he knew all about Jimmy Page and all that stuff at Boleskine House. So he was really, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
This guy's a charlatan.
The king was exposed. So me and a guy called Ray Palmer, who was a photographer, we flew to New York, got there to see this show, and the King lost his voice. He'd lost his voice, so the show was cancelled. And I think we stayed in New York for 2 weeks waiting for him to get his voice back.
Brilliant.
It never came back. Fantastic. It never came back. And I went home and did a phoner. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So we had a couple of weeks in New York doing other, whoever was around at the time.
That's the amount of money that was sloshing around.
But it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was ridiculous all the time. So then, obviously I suppose LA was the main sort of center. So that was where you ended up, really, which was, in retrospect, amazing. I remember the first time, because I was only quite young. I remember the first sort of shock of when I'm having some time off and having to pay for a holiday and pay for flights and pay for a hotel.
Yes, suddenly.
Not knowing how to do it.
Well, you could do it, but it was a sort of.
Where's my car to meet me?
Where's my money?
Yeah.
But I mean, you had no money, but you didn't need any money. That was the thing, wasn't it? You didn't need.
So all the time you were living the life of the kind of rock and roll animal at Kerrang, and presumably keeping up your image in the office. Were you playing cricket?
Yeah, I did because my girlfriend at the time was playing for her dad's team. So I could it wasn't a sort of super serious thing, so I could kind of drop it. If I wasn't there, it didn't really matter. I kept playing cricket. I played, so it would go from.
Did you tell them at the office that you were playing cricket?
Really, no,
it's not a very Kerrang thing, is it?
It's not. It's only kind of later that you discover people who were interested in cricket. I remember a couple of years ago I did a piece about there's. I don't know if you know. You might know. There's only ever been, I think, 2 gigs, like music gigs at the Oval, the cricket ground, the Oval.
Oh right, yes.
And that's because
the Who played the Oval.
This was the Who. Well, what happened because it's owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, so Prince Charles, effectively, they don't allow shows to be played. But there were a couple of shows put on, and it was put on by the guy. I spoke to him. It's the guy who organised the Isle of Wight festival.
Oh, the Folks guy.
Yeah, the thing,
Ricky Folk.
Yeah. And he, I can't remember his name now, but he was looking for something else after he'd done that and ended up putting on that Who show. And Genesis, the sort of young Genesis, played that. So I interviewed Steve Hackett about what it was like to be one of the few people who'd played at the Oval. It turned out he quite liked cricket, and he'd been at school with Malcolm McDonald, Super Mac, the striker from Newcastle and Arsenal. Yeah,
that's amazing.
And he said Malcolm McDonald was our opening bowler at school and was super fast. And everyone was terrified of Malcolm McDonald. So it was like Steve Hackett was telling me, we ended up having this ridiculous conversation about Malcolm McDonald. So those kind of things sort of sprung up in later
Right.
years. It's quite nice. So the guy
But
from the
you would have been
Stranglers,
roundly mocked if they'd found out you were playing cricket. Sure, that
probably.
was a sackable
I would
thing.
imagine. I would
Yeah.
imagine so.
It's the whites for a start, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
Completely
and it's the whole thing about cricket. It didn't kind of mesh with Nicky Six's lifestyle.
No. So how did you end up writing about cricket rather than writing about Bon Jovi?
Well, that was weird. I mean, I kind of got out of the music thing. I sort of thought I'd either, I was never committed enough to do it for life, and I didn't know enough about it. I mean, and I kind of didn't really know what to do. I ended up on a sports mag and drifted about a bit. And I wrote the first book I wrote was about bodybuilding, which might sound like a strange subject to write about. It is a very strange subject to write about, but there was a kind of logic behind it because that's the start of the century. It was very hard to access any sports stars if you want to talk to them, footballers and even cricketers and whoever, tennis players. But if you want to do that kind of old school, journalism where you would spend a couple of years with people and tell their story, I was looking for a kind of quite an extreme macho sport that I could do that in. And it turned out that bodybuilding was perfect because
I can remember a review of that book in the Times. And
it was by Giles Smith.
When it's not alarming, it's merely amazing.
Yeah. And it wasn't down to me. It was due to this incredible, this ridiculous.
What did you learn about bodybuilding?
Everything. I literally knew nothing about it at all. Only the kind of, at the time, one of the most famous men in the world, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who during the course of the book became the governor of California.
All right.
I knew about him, and I knew he owed his sort of film career to bodybuilding. And he had this very strange early life, which I don't know if you know much about. But he's from a place in Austria, a small place in Austria, which has this kind of bloodline. Genetics is everything in bodybuilding, and he comes from this small place where that kind of bloodline runs from. And he had this, really, really strange childhood where his father had been in the Nazi party. His brother was the favoured child. His brother was called Meinhard, and his brother was this sort of golden child who everything was expected of, and Arnold wasn't. And at some point, they kind of, as Arnold went up, they sort of swapped destinies, and Meinhard ended up dying in a car crash, and Arnold actually raised Meinhard's son as his own. Which is a kind of incredibly amazing thing to do. Schwarzenegger's an amazing guy. I was finding all this stuff out about him, and he'd been in the film Pumping Iron, and I spoke to the people that did that. And then I met a guy called Dorian Yates, who was, this was the sort of example of what I was talking about, was in the 1990s in England, we were terrible at all sports. We were terrible at cricket, we were terrible at football, we were terrible at everything. But except bodybuilding, Dorian Yates was the 6 times Mr. Olympia, which was the biggest title you can win in bodybuilding. And yet nobody knew who he was. Nobody had a clue who he was. So I got to know Dorian, who's still an amazing man. And he kind of opened up this world for me, and we ended up going to the Mr. Olympia show, which was in Las Vegas. And anyway, the book kind of went from there. So I did that. And then I didn't want to write about cricket because cricket was my thing. It was the thing I did to kind of get away from writing and get away from all of those things. And in the end, I just got so frustrated with what was happening in the world of cricket. I started an anonymous blog, which was called The Old Batsman. And I just started writing in that, and people wanted to reading it. They wanted to know who it was. This was the sort of glory era of blogging, I suppose about 2008, 2009. And the blog got discovered, and sort of through that, I started writing about cricket. So that's how that happened.
Oh, and really?
Yeah. And then ended up...
So you've written books about cricket, though.
Yeah.
I was reading one the other day. I was reading one the other day, which the meaning of cricket.
Yeah.
Which I wanted to talk to you about, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, God, well, thank you. I'm glad you did.
And it's because there is something about cricket, isn't it? That kind of that tries men's souls more than most sports, doesn't it?
I think it's the sort of relationship between cricket and time, because it lasts for a long time, and yet at any point in that time, only 2 people from one team are involved.
That's right.
11 from the other. So you spend inordinate amounts of time sitting around, especially if you don't do very well. And that's what allows the game to kind of percolate in your mind and, take on its own sort of hinterland in your head. which is sort of where it exists most of the time.
If you tell somebody who's interested in football who knows nothing about cricket, these events last 5 whole days, and that's only one part of a series of games that decides the result, they simply cannot believe it.
No, I mean, it's
it involves prawn sandwiches,
exactly.
Cold drink.
I mean, it's arcane, it's ridiculous. I mean, it is a ridiculous game, but it's once you've got it in you, it's in you. It's only the same as music or anything, I suppose. Especially once it latches onto that part of your psyche. That world is there.
What's your take on the fact that I think it's fact that cricket there's more suicides in cricket amongst professional cricketers than any other sport? Why is that?
I did something about there's a really good book. I think it's called Silence of the Heart by David Friel, which is about cricket and suicide. And I think it's partly it attracts a certain type of personality. I mean, if you are introspective, it's a good game for you. If you're a bit of a loner, it's a good game for you, because it just has that internal territory that you can visit whenever you want to. But I think the suicides they're talking about are of professional cricketers. It's a game of failure. So
this is it, isn't it?
But
most of the time you fail.
Well, because if you're a batsman, your kind of performance is measured by average, which is worked out the average amounts of runs you score every time you bat. But actually, that's just it's a slightly false measure, because what tends to happen is you fail twice and succeed once, and the one success it enables the average to be of a particular level. But you still have to deal with those 2 failures. So every great batsman might average 50, but he'll fail to make 50 in 2 out of every 3 innings. So a great bowler will take a wicket once every 60 balls, so they'll fail with 59 deliveries. So it's a game of failure.
And it's true that, unlike, say, football, where your personal assessment is that a particular player did really well, in cricket there is an actual aggregate. There is a tally in runs
that tells you
somebody got 127 runs did better than somebody got 125. There's no way around that.
Yeah, no, there is.
Your colours are nailed to the mast.
It's empirical in that sense, and that drags. If you're dependent on that for your living, that drags on your soul. It must do, and it's very, very public. Any sport is very public, isn't it? Your humiliation is public.
So I was thinking about this again. I don't follow it too closely, but England announced a new squad, don't they, this week? And apart from Joe Root and Ben Stokes and and Anderson abroad, the rest of them. But who do you want? Kind of thing.
Exactly.
And you just think these guys are cannon fodder. Most of these guys will be discarded within 3 weeks, never to play for England again. Isn't that the case?
Maybe. I mean, that's happened sort of quite a lot. But then you think, you have to think, how good are those guys at cricket? It's virtually
the ones who fail. You mean
the ones who fail? It's virtually impossible to tell you how good they're. I mean, there's that wonderful bit in Fever Pitch, Nick Hornby, where he's talking about an Arsenal player called Gus Caesar, who was a kind of famous terrace target for the Arsenal fans, not just the away fans, because of one single incident that happened it was like the Littlewoods Cup final where Caesar was at fault for a goal against Luton Town, and it kind of weighed on his confidence. He started playing, less and less well, and became more and more of a target. And Hornby writes this fantastic thing where he goes, imagine you're Gus Caesar. You grow up and you're the best player in your street, and you go to your school and you're the best player in your school, and then you're the best player in the district, and then you go to Arsenal and you survive all of the rounds and rounds and rounds, under 13s, under 14s. There's 60, they cut them to 10, they cut them to 2, and it's still you. It's still you. You get in the reserves and it's still you. You get in the first team and it's not you. And that, that's what's happening to these guys in cricket. They're succeeding, and that kind of failure that we were talking about earlier, they haven't really had that yet. That kind of, they've got this sort of rock solid confidence in everything, and then it goes wrong, and it goes wrong very publicly.
There's the test arena that finds it out, isn't it?
It is, and you've got people, and then you've got. I mean, imagine what it's like on Twitter. I would never, if I was a sportsman now, I would never go on Twitter.
No,
because you've got idiots like me going, "Oh, well, what did you do that for?" Stupid.
You're so right.
You know, it's a terrible life. It's a horrible life. But the highs are so high that.
Who was it who scored 34 out of 36 balls the other day? Was it Stokes or was it Root?
Well, they both had very good innings.
It's Stokes. Yeah, Stokes.
Stokes was he got 34 runs. Now the guy who was bowling him was a 19-year-old.
Yeah, that's right.
Probably really, really good.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that guy must have just gone home and thought, that's there forever.
I was brutalised by Stokes, and that's maybe what he's remembered for. You just don't know at this stage. I mean, the only thing you would say is it's slightly more common in cricket than it used to be for that kind of justice to be meted out, because the game has changed and the game is a lot faster and a lot harder now.
So do you spend a lot of time with cricketers, or do you
I have done recently, because I've just collaborated on a book with Jeffrey Boycott. It's an amazing experience. That's coming out in June. It's called Being Jeffrey Boycott.
Controversial figure.
Well, he's an amazing guy. I mean, as you say, has had a long and controversial life. He's 81 now. He was 80 when this was first mooted. What he did was, during the first lockdown, he left Test Match Special because he was slightly vulnerable. He couldn't go into the bubble or anything like that. So he was at home. He didn't have anything to do. For the first time, he sort of had no cricket in his life. So he started writing a diary of each of his Test match appearances. And he played 108 Test matches. He's one of the first people to play 100 Test matches for England. He started in 1964. He ended in 1982. And he wrote over 100,000 words, which, if you think about it, if you're a writer, you kind of think you get slightly blasé about that. But for someone who doesn't write, to write 100,000 words is impressive in itself. And the diary kind of got passed around to various people, and through that, I got to read it. And I just thought it was in his sort of very particular voice. It wasn't, I would say, I'm sure he'd forgive me for saying, it wasn't brilliantly written, but it had voice.
Yeah.
And I think as a writer, that's the one thing you look for, is voice. If you've got voice, you can do anything. And so I kind of had and I sort of thought, I just had this idea, this kind of other voice bounced back to me, which was a second person voice. So it was almost replying to Boycott. So you get a bit of the diary, and then you get this other bit, which is me sort of speaking back to him, telling him, because the diary just about the Test matches, it's telling him what's happening to him in his life around the Test. So it's really what happened, but it's being reflected back at him. So the book kind of goes him, me, him, me, him, me. So it's I mean, as a sports book, I guess hopefully it's something original, and kudos to him for doing it, because he had kind of great doubts. Because the one thing in his life, Boycott, people think he's this very brash character, which he is. But the key to his cricket was emotion. And it goes back to what we were talking about again. He wanted so badly to succeed, and he batted on these great waves of emotion. And it meant so much to him that once he retired from cricket, and he was 46 when he retired, he couldn't keep a cricket bat in the house. His wife wouldn't let him, because if he picked a bat up, all of the old emotions would course through him.
That's fascinating.
So I mean,
that's not uncommon in all kinds of sport. I mean, top level tennis players just will not play when they stop.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite common in cricket. You get some who can't stop playing and still like to turn out and do charity games and club cricket and that sort of, and others who Boycott has. He claimed that it's like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he did a thing for Sky Sports where he was in a net. And he picked up a bat and knocked a few balls back. And he said, that's the first time I've batted since I retired. Which is probably true. I mean, he's very, very frank, very forthright. And he'll tell you anything. He'll tell you completely honestly anything. So it's amazing.
You're editing those diaries, basically, or co-editing.
So we'll sort of write, it's his diary. Yeah, so I edited the diary and then wrote these responses which run through the book. So
is he like one of those sportsmen? Can he remember all those?
His memory is utterly phenomenal. When I hadn't met him, we'd done a few kind of Zoom calls and so on. And the first test last year against India at Lord's, he said, "Come and meet me. You meet me outside the museum. The museum at Lord's is at the back of the pavilion. There's a walkway between." And it's a busy thoroughfare during a test match because the ground's sold out. But this was just after lunch. He said, "Meet me at 2:00, which is after lunch." So I went around there and met him and his wife, Rachel, who's a really lovely person. And we're just standing outside the museum, supposed to be having this first chat where we meet, and I kind of try and convince him to do this book, And it was just, we were there for 45 minutes. I just spoke to his wife because people were coming up to him constantly. I mean, just and they wouldn't even say his name. They'd just go, 1968, Headingley, do you remember? And they would just, this was his life, and he was, his memory is astonishing. He'll go, yeah, I remember that so-and-so gave me out.
So he doesn't have to go and remind himself.
No. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about the emotion. It meant so much to him. The emotion of playing cricket.
It always amazes me about footballers. They talk about any game in the middle of their career. They go, left footer, corner of the. They can remember that without looking it up.
Yeah. And but in professional cricket as well, they've got that thing where there are, as you were saying, scorecards and their highlights and all of that, even of Boycotts. There's even footage of his first test in 64, so he can go and look back at himself. But I think that's kind of like looking at someone else. It's not the experience of doing it, but what he can still channel into is the experience of what it was like to do it. And he, it's funny when he sort of still feels the injustice of it,
Oh, he will.
Yeah. He still hasn't got.
This is going to be a fantastic book.
I hope so. I mean, I hope so.
Really
interesting. He's a really fascinating guy. So
he is. I mean, I always thought he was gripping as a kind of summariser on Test match.
Well, he was also.
He was never dull, oddly enough. You know what I mean? Say the same things, but never dull.
Yeah, and he kind of his level of fame was odd. I was thinking this when I was writing the book because he was one of. If you think about the 70s. When everyone was less famous and there were a lot fewer famous people, he was one of the few sportsmen who would be on Parkinson. I mean, he was mates with Parkinson.
Yeah, he was.
But you would have Boycott, Brian Clough, who was Boycott's big mate. They were really, I didn't realise how good friends they were until I sort of got to know Jeffrey a little bit. And Muhammad Ali would go on there. But were there any other sportsmen who used to get on? George Best.
Yeah.
George Best, of course.
They were great pals.
Yeah. So that was the kind of level of fame that Boycott was at during his career. So he was sort of a lot more famous than some of the other players.
We look forward to that.
Since.
Who are your taking your two specialist subjects here in the world of cricket? What kind of there are music people, aren't there? I mean, there was famously the late Bob Willis, huge Bob Dylan fan.
Yeah, changed his middle name to Dylan. Yeah, I suppose Mark Butcher's probably the most famous.
Mark Butcher's made records. Hasn't he?
He makes records, and he's a really, really good guitarist. I mean, he's I've seen him. He's played at very events and. Obviously I've seen plenty of gigs and he's decent. Yeah, I mean he's really good and he can sing as well.
Duckworth Lewis method.
The Duckworth. They're not cricketers. They're great. They're very funny.
But there are people who've written a whole round book about cricket, which is
it's really, really very, very funny. The Gatting one is very good.
Brilliant.
Tim Key, I don't know if do you know Tim Key? The comedian. He's a big cricket and football fan. I've just done a little podcast series for a title called The Night Watchman, which is Wisden's quarterly journal. We've done a series of podcasts for that, and Tim is on one about whether or not cricket's funny, and he's incredibly funny on that. And he reads his poem about Mark Ramprakash that he's written, which is absolutely fabulous.
Fantastic.
And it
is cricket funny? That's a good question.
I mean, it is a really good question. It is funny. Yeah, I think it is because it has. I mean, it has the kind of, I always say, if I'm doing my shtick at festivals or whatever, cricket's natural place in literature is in the sitcom. Because if you think about all of the great sitcoms, they all have a cricket episode. Dad's Army has a fantastic cricket episode where Fred Truman's in it, which is amazing. And it's because it's about social stereotypes, which is the same thing that sitcoms are about, and it's about class, which is the same thing most sitcoms are about. Yeah. So what sort of cricketer Mannering is going to be, what sort of cricketer John Le Mesurier is going to be before they even play the game.
That's so true.
So it fits so beautifully.
They're expressing their character. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Now, I mean, probably the greatest of all cricket episodes is Never Decreasing Circles, which has the necessary element of tragedy as well, because what's going to happen in that. Ever Decreasing Circles is Richard Bryars.
The next door neighbour is going to be brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. The guy who runs the hairdressers is going to be fabulous. And Bryars, who's dedicated his life to this running this cricket team, is going to, and it truly is, and it has that kind of poignancy as well. And it's the same, actually. Here's a kind of, I would say, something that's analogous between heavy metal and cricket. It has that poignancy. And the reason things like Spinal Tap and the Anvil movie that was on TV again.
Yes.
The reason those things are funny is because they're poignant. It's about the gap between ambition and achievement. And cricket is a lot about that as well. And that's, why you get that kind of, it's funny, but it's sad. It's those kind of emotions that certainly that Ever Decreasing Circles episode plays with, and certainly that Spinal Tap plays with, which was again on the other night, and I watched it, and I was just like, I hadn't seen it for so long, and it was just hit after hit. Every scene had, the lines that you remember. It's an incredible piece of work.
And it's entirely about failure, because it starts at their high point and spirals down.
Yeah, and then it gives you
revisit that at every moment.
And then it gives you that, once they've been completely humiliated, it gives you that little note of hope at the end. But that was one of my favourite Kerrang trips, was interviewing Spinal Tap, which they did in character.
Well, they're coming back. You'll be pleased to know.
I hear. Yeah, I'm delighted to hear.
Although I think actually Christopher Guest ought to make a cricket film. And he is English, isn't he?
Probably, he is. He is. He's
a member of the House of Lords, isn't he?
He's a Hayden Guest, isn't he? Yes, he's got the kind of the... Yeah, I'm sure I play cricket for a team of writers, and there's always great discussion about whether you can write a cricket, successful cricket novel, because there aren't that many,
What are the good ones? What are the good cricket novels?
The good one. I mean, they're slightly obscure. The best one, I've got it down here. I'll show you the cover. This is my favourite one. It's a book called Chinaman. Oh, it's the wrong way around.
Right. Don't know that. Yeah,
it's by Shihan Karuna Talaka, and it's really about Sri Lanka. It's a fabulous book. It's about an addled journalist called WG, sort of rather thuddingly, but he's addled and pissed and old and dying, and he's trying to find this cricketer called Pradeep Matthew, who he thinks once bowled this miracle ball for Sri Lanka. But it's sort of this kind of search for himself. So I mean, that's brilliant, but it's generally that there are too many characters. Again, it's why it works for sitcoms, but is impossible. And it's Sebastian Faulks, the great novelist. It tells a very, very funny story about one of his first attempts to write a novel was a cricket novel. And he just had to abandon it because he ended up with like 42 characters, because there was the cricket team in the opposition and the committee men and all the rest of it, and it was just became ridiculous. And that's the kind of problem with it as art, It's and the fact that the sport itself, it throws up, such unlikely conclusions that you wouldn't really want to write them, novelistically, because you wouldn't believe them.
So do you still keep in touch with the old music?
Oh yeah, I do, because there's a
when Bon Jovi come over, do you think I'm going to go and see them?
I do, and the last
you take them to the Oval.
Well, what if they wanted to go? But the last thing I went and interviewed Def Leppard the other week, which was fantastic, which I hadn't done for years. They were staying at the Savoy. It was a good old press lig, full on day where they all sat in different rooms and did their interviews, and it was great, and it was revelatory. I learned stuff I never knew. It's because heavy metal's had this great renaissance on what they call the legacy circuit in America, where they all tour every summer. Def Leppard are touring with Motley Crue and Joan Jett, and they're sold out everywhere they go. $100 a ticket. They're making
more money than they've ever made before.
Like anybody, really.
I said to Joe, the singer, I said, how do you, because they did, he said, them and Motley Crue, they alternate each night, who's headlining. I said, well, how do you work out who's going to headline in what city? Because it's streaming. Because we just look at whoever's got the best streaming in that city.
That's very interesting.
He said, I thought it was amazing. He said, it's transformed everything. He said, you don't have to guess anything now. You just instant feedback.
Every single bit of the music business is like that. There's no guesswork. I remember being told this years ago by a label boss. He says, we'd put out records nowadays in the days of downloads. We put out records at midnight on Saturday, and I can get up on Sunday morning and I can tell you whether it's a hit or not.
Exactly, yeah.
It just knows straight away.
They work out what songs to put in their set from city to city by looking at the stream. This song's really popular.
It's so fun. It's rock and roll. It's all data. It's all data.
And as he said, as Joe Elliott was saying, he said, back in the day, you'd go somewhere and you if you wanted to know how it did, you'd wait for 3 weeks and the promoter would write to you. You'd get an actual letter through the post. So, congratulations on your South American tour. We made X amount of money.
But it's so funny, isn't it? The rock and roll is changed by data, and yet cricket, which you would have thought could be changed by data,
well, it is.
Not.
I mean, it is.
Is it?
The whole sort of.
But they don't shuffle the batting order on the basis that he does better at number 3.
Oh, yeah, they do. They do. It's all about especially in 2020 cricket now, which is the most data applied game because it's the shortest, and it has the least amount of possible outcomes. And the aim is very clear. It's simply to score as many runs as you can in those 20 overs. Yeah. So they'll go deep into the data now. So it's about matchups. So it's like, this guy's a great player against left arm spin in the 6th over. So you want to bowl so and so to him. So it's incredible. And I always argue that it's completely reductive because you're just giving people more of what they're either good or bad at, and you just end up going down a tunnel where creativity sort of gets stifled. But that's a boring discussion for cricket analysts.
You ought to ask if you've got any objects, rock and roll objects to show us.
I did.
Have you kept anything?
Kept anything you can dig out and wave at the camera?
I kept I'll wave you my. This is one of my proud. This is. This is
gold disc.
It's my Aerosmith gold disc.
Right.
It's for the famous album Get a Grip, which I'm sure you all know, which has a cat. You can probably see it has a cow's udder.
Oh, right, of course.
There, with the Aerosmith logo branded onto the cow, which I hope they didn't really. And the cow's udder is pierced.
What did you do to be that way?
Absolutely nothing.
You might have
no idea at all
review
why they gave it. No, I didn't even really like them. So I have no idea. So I bought that, and I bought this is an album by Marillion, who are probably my favourite band.
Marillion, wow.
Yeah, it's called Holidays in Eden. I bought that because I played tambourine on one song.
Oh, there you go.
Which was great. Yeah, so I was quite pleased with that.
So you
rock and roll instrument of all.
You keep the faith with Marillion, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. They're fantastic.
All right.
Yeah, they're still. Right. So you
still going. Mighty Fish as a solo act.
Fish is a solo, absolutely.
Because he's still going. He kind of tends an allotment, doesn't he? Then he goes out every now and again.
He does. And he does a sort of a kind of social media, Facebook event every Friday. He tells people about the old days. He's a great narrator,
Yeah,
he always was a very good talker.
Value.
Yeah, great talker. Yeah, I love it. I love Marillion.
John, it's been lovely talking to you.
It's been lovely talking to you. Sorry, I went.
It was fun. Really fun. What about the greatest record ever made?
Yes, go on.
We asked for your nomination.
I don't know.
The greatest cricketer ever played, obviously Donald Bradman.
Well, you said. See, I always contend it's WG.
All right,
Grace, because he invented the modern game. He through
How do you feel about the controversy about Grace that all those records aren't true now?
Well, it's a minor. It was the editor of Wisdom, Lawrence Booth, decided that 2 of Grace's first class hundreds weren't first class. They've been knocked off his tally. So I think he's down to like 124.
What power that is!
I know it is. I said, Lawrence, what are you playing? Taking them off Grace, and he gave a couple to Jack Hobbs. He didn't need them because he was already on 197.
Deciding
this is the kind of out of everything that Lawrence wrote these sort of fantastic. Every year in Wisdom, the editor writes his notes, which are kind of State of the Union address. And he addressed cricket's had this terrible time: racism, sexism, financial irregularity, and the new competition that nobody likes. But you can guarantee the one thing that will exercise the most Wisdom readers is the fact that 200s have been taken off Grace.
Seems wrong to me.
It seems wrong to me.
Greatest record.
I don't know. I thought about that, and I thought of doing something stupid, but I actually found because I've just gone on to sort of favourites now. I don't have it. And I found my first ever record, which I went to my mum's to get, which was this one.
Wow.
Elvis.
Oh, God. Was that
advertised?
Yeah, it was on Arcade.
Arcade, advertised on TV. You had to send away for it. You had to send away. And I got a shock when I read the sleeve notes. I read them this morning. And it starts off 20 years ago, Elvis Aaron Presley, a 19-year-old truck driver. And I thought, my God, he was still alive. He was still alive when this came out. And I don't know why I thought he brought, because I had it when I was a little kid. So I bought that, and if I was being serious, I would say probably the greatest record of all time is "Suspicious Minds," isn't it? It has to be.
That's good. That's a good choice.
I would say.
So many good versions of it too. Oh, brilliant!
Well,
we wouldn't argue with that. We wouldn't argue with anything. John, that has been fantastic.
No, it's fantastic.
Really
good fun.
exciting.
It was lovely to see you.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.